Welcome back into Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. This is the breaking news we're tracking. President Trump saying that the U.S. has struck in Iran. He says we have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. All planes are now outside of Iran airspace. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordow. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There is not another military in the world, he says, that could have done this. Now is the time for peace, he writes in all caps. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Standing by is National Security Analyst, retired Marine Intelligence Officer, and host of the Strat podcast, Hal Kempfer. Hal, you and I were planning to get on here and talk about the idea of B-2 bombers being sent to Guam. What do you make of this attack? It's already happened.
Well, it's interesting, Austin. The essence of war, and I'm sure, if you read Sun Tzu and The Art of War, deception is a core component. And of course, the story went out, they're going to Guam. Now, I actually went and looked at the map. They go, you don't really gain a whole lot by going to Guam. Well, the story was out, they're going to Guam. Obviously, they went a different direction. And that was apparently, shall we say, a cover story for where they were actually going. And they completed the mission. They did it sooner and faster than most experts predicted, that most, certainly anybody looking at this thought was going to happen. They thought the decision-making process was still in the works. And that is the essence of military art, if you will, or military science, is that you use deception, you use surprise. That's how you achieve your objectives. The B-2s got in there. They didn't hit just one facility, the Fordo facility, although based on what little we have from that text that was sent out by President Trump, that one was hit, I'm assuming, pretty good from what they said, which means more than one massive ordnance penetrator, GBU-57 bomb was actually used on that site. But they also hit the other 2 big sites, Isfahan and Natanz, which I thought was interesting. I'm not quite sure if they were using just GBU-57s or using those in concert with something else, because those are a little bit different locations, although I'm pretty sure both have an underground component to them. But I think the decision was, we're just going to take out Iran's nuclear capability across the board, which is essentially what we did, making a pretty bold statement. And I have to tell you, if you're the Iranian foreign minister, in the middle of negotiations, trying to figure this out, well, your card, if you will, about saying, hey, we'll go ahead and have you come in and international inspectors look at these sites. Well, that whole card was just taken away because those sites are no longer functional. Of course, the fear is that those bombs didn't quite do everything that we hoped they were going to do. That was the big concern at Fordo. The geophysical, the features, if you will, underneath with all that hard rock, at least reportedly hard rock, that the bombs would have to negotiate or have to deal with, meant that it would be more difficult to destroy that underground facility, those underground cavities, with that particular device. So it's not, we don't know. The battle damage assessment is yet to come out on how well these facilities were destroyed. But I imagine that very extensive Israeli intelligence capability that they have kind of permeated throughout Iran, particularly around Tehran, that is being basically charged to find out as much as possible, along with all the other sources of intelligence on that, wherever it comes from around the world, to find out just how extensive and how thorough the damage was at these facilities.
I don't see the word B-2 bomber in this Truth Social post, Hal, but is it pretty safe to assume that that's what was used here?
It's pretty much implied. Yeah, I don't know. He didn't put that in there, but I don't know what other bombers there were B-52s out there, but frankly, even with a rather permissive air environment like that, I don't know that I'd want to risk putting B-52 bombers over Iran because of the potential repercussions. So as far as I could tell, the only thing that we would use, and when he says planes, the only planes I can think of that we would use, the only planes that were really in the discussion were B-2 bombers. I'm kind of wondering how big this was. Usually you got uh, one or two planes that would hit each site. I just don't know how big this was. It's rather interesting. Of course, he waited till they were out of Iranian airspace before he put out a text, which that's part of the strategic communications piece, which is, do you hold off or do you admit it soon? Well, you obviously, for operational risk purposes, you don't want to say anything until all the planes and the crews are safely out of harm's way. On the other hand, you don't want to sit on it too long because, well, frankly, the word will get out that this was good, that this happened. So you want to kind of get ahead of that, and it looks like they did that quite well, which is the U.S. put out the communication on this prior to the Iranians or anybody else saying something. And in that business, that's kind of what you want to do. You want to get your story or narrative out there first as to what happened before the Iranians cook up whatever they cook up, and we'll see what they say. And I'm sure the Iranians will come back and say, it wasn't that bad or whatever it was. And they may make extraneous claims that they shot down a B-2 bomber or something. Who knows what the Iranians will come up with. I've seen some stuff that they put out on what they've done with the Israelis. And they had one where they photoshopped apparently photoshopped and did some weird stuff with an F-35 claiming to shoot it down. But when you looked at the picture, it had people around where this F-35 was supposed to be. Well, you look at the cockpit, you could have put 20 or 30 of the people inside the cockpit of the F-35, which kind of tells you whoever photoshopped it really didn't look at it that closely. That was an F-35 was being flown by a transformer, as near as I can figure out, because the size just didn't work. So got to be careful about Iranian propaganda. I'm sure they're going to try and do something after this strike as well.
I have been getting questions from viewers all week, and the number one question people ask me is the U.S. going to get involved? Do we have an answer now?
I think we do. I think that's about as definitive as it gets. Yeah, I would say that has definitely erased strategic ambiguity. We are involved. The only question I have is this what we call a one and done? And it might be. Everything I've seen indicates that President Trump does not want to get involved in this war at all, if he could have avoided it. There was kind of a strategic imperative to do something. The concern has always been that the Iranians, once they were under attack, and we may not pick up on it's not like Khamenei's going to clear his decision with U.S. intelligence or Israeli intelligence to say, hey, I've decided I'm going to make a bomb. But the fear was that they would suddenly accelerate, which they could, and they had the capability. And everybody said that they're at the threshold of, whether it's within days or weeks or a couple months of making a nuclear device, that once there was bombing going on, once they were at war with Israel, that they would accelerate that process. So the clock was ticking in terms of being able to physically stop that from ever happening. And that's what President Trump and his, the National Security Council and all of his advisors were working with, was if they don't do it, what are the consequences? And the consequences are that Iran could have a nuclear device. And that would be absolutely catastrophic. Obviously, for Israel, if such a device was to get through, and some of the ballistic missiles from Iran have gotten through to Israel, they have hit major urban targets in Israel. You can imagine what that would be if just one nuclear warhead was on any one of those missiles and made it through. It would have been absolutely catastrophic for the nation state of Israel. It would have been catastrophic for the region. If Iran gets nuclear weapons, then all the other countries around them would suddenly say, oh, we have to have nuclear weapons, and you'd have a nuclear proliferation issue, and you'd have a lot of different players in the nuclear game, if you want to know the nuclear threat, that would make the situation globally less stable than it was before.
So I'm hearing from the New York Times that the president is going to address the nation tonight. We don't have a time yet. We'll bring you his speech in full as soon as we hear what time it's going to take place. We also are hearing from Bloomberg. Looks like Trump posted on Truth Social Fordo is gone. Fordo is gone.
Mm.
Fordo being gone, Hal, what does that mean for Iran's nuclear program?
It's not exactly what I call a typical military phrase. We don't normally say targets are gone. Every once in a while, it's very true though. And in this case, what it means is I'm assuming, reading into that we have thoroughly destroyed the site, which would indicate that more than one GBU 57 was dropped. It could have been several, could have been a couple of planes. I think each one can carry two. And so if four GBU 57s, those massive ordnance penetrators, were dropped with the precision that is incumbent with those particular weapons, and certainly the B-2's capabilities, that would probably do a thorough job of destroying that facility as a nuclear enrichment facility. So I'm assuming he must have got some intelligence. We probably had a lot of things looking at that site, shall we say, and he got confirmation that they had effect on target. And that's the way he says effect on target, is that Fordo is gone, which is another way of saying it's no longer a concern. That was the biggest one we were concerned about, because the Israelis couldn't do anything about that. Now, I'm going to be kind of curious to hear what exactly was done at the other two nuclear sites. Uh, by everything we know, they had some capabilities, some facilities that were underground. I don't know if it would require a GBU 57 to take those out, but certainly that would do quite a job. By the way, those things are not, these are very smart bombs. They don't all have to go down to 200 feet to penetrate. If there's a bunker, it's 100 feet down or 50 feet down, the bomb can be adjusted to get effect on target with that. And so we may end up seeing some texts or tweets, whatever you want to call those, social media posts, that basically will maybe illuminate us as to the impact on the other two sites. And if those three sites are eliminated, then Iran no longer has the capability of creating a nuclear weapon, at least as far as I know. Of course, the fear was that they had secretly developed a nuclear weapon. There's no proof of that, but I will tell you that this week there was a 5.1 earthquake in the Tehran, near the Tehran area. Now, it was 10 kilometers deep. Nobody has anything 10 kilometers deep, but the fact there was an earthquake and it was in the Fordo area or whatever had people speculating, oh my gosh, this is Iran doing an underground nuclear test, blah, blah, blah. There really wasn't anything to support that on the fact that there was an earthquake in that area, coincidentally. But it does tell you how people are kind of, leaning forward and on their, basically concerned about what Iran has or doesn't have. At this point, I can tell you this, based on that Iran does not have a capability to use any of those cylinders with their 60% enriched uranium for anything. One thing will be interesting is to find out how much residual radiation is in that area. Now, those things are really deep, and everything I've seen from the targeting standpoint would indicate that the radiation would be very localized to that site, wouldn't be that much. Same with the other sites. It wasn't really assessed that the radiation would be that big. By the way, I should mention, Isfahan is a little bit different. That is not a uranium enrichment site. That was actually a heavy water site. And out of that heavy water process, the byproduct or the product of that is plutonium. And of course, plutonium can also be used to make a nuclear bomb. So that's a little bit different site. And it does tell you just how broad the program was that Iran was pursuing, that they were enriching uranium for a nuclear device with uranium. They also had a place that was producing plutonium for a device using plutonium. So they were, pardon the expression, kind of hedging their bets in the nuclear weapons development area.
Al, getting more clarity on when the president will address the nation. Karoline Leavitt, the press secretary, says 10 Eastern time. So we'll expect in about an hour and 40 minutes the president to address the nation on these strikes. We've been hearing from Iran's supreme leader. He's been threatening the U.S. if the U.S. gets involved in this. What avenues does Iran actually have to hit back at the U.S.?
That's an interesting one, and that's one of the reasons you have those carriers in place. That's one of the reasons you have all the cruisers and everything else in place. They can use obviously what they have been doing, drones and ballistic missiles, and I would expect to see a lot of those launched. The question is, will they start attacking U.S. facilities, U.S. bases in the Persian Gulf? We have bases in Syria, Al Assad in Iraq, where I used to be based, Kuwait, where I used to be based, Bahrain, where I was kind of for a little bit based, and UAE, all up and down. So the fear is that those things would all come under attack. And all those host nations, obviously, we're very concerned about that too. So that's one of the fears. The other big fear in terms of traditional military application is the Straits of Hormuz. That is that strait that basically is how they exit the Persian or Arab Gulf into the Indian Ocean. Obviously, a phenomenal amount of gas and oil moves through that strait. If that was to be blocked, that would have an immediate inflationary effect on oil prices and gas prices around the world. So that would be very significant. And Iran does have a lot of different means to do that. They have a lot of small boat capability. They can put sea mines in there. Obviously, they have a lot of drones and other things they could use to really kind of cause some issues that would be really actually bigger than what we see with the Houthis in the Red Sea and the Bab el Mandeb Strait and the problems that we've seen out there. So that's the other thing. And of course, the third one is using their axis of resistance, their proxy terror network around the world. It's not just in the Middle East, I should point out. There are certainly with Hezbollah, they have had operatives around the world, to include here in the United States for quite some time. The Iranians have covert operatives around the world through their Al Quds network. That many of them would be what we refer to as sleepers. In other words, they're here, they're ready to be operationalized, but they have not been operationalized. And so that would be a big concern. And that's one of the things I will tell you, having worked counterterrorism for many, many years, and that we've always been concerned that something would happen in the world, with Iran, that they would make the decision to operationalize those networks. And we have seen indications and that they have been looking at a number of key target sets in the United States and elsewhere that they would want to hit. So that's something I can guarantee that the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and a lot of others are looking at all that data right now, trying to increase the security posture at all those sites, and certainly taking a hard look at any of the folks that they had identified as possible perpetrators or anybody involved with that, to put a lot of attention on them very quick to make sure that they are dissuaded from doing something like that. So those are the things that could happen that they're looking at right now. And by the way, that naval presence that you see right near the Straits of Hormuz, part of that is to have a ready response package should the Iranians, shall we say, go to sea to do what I just talked about. That I would imagine that you might see the next phase of this hitting a lot of different targets in perhaps southern Iran, around Bandar Abbas, and some of those other areas where that capability would be launched from to basically cork up the Straits of Hormuz.
Let's show this. We just saw another post from President Trump. He says, I will be giving an address to the nation at 10 p.m. Eastern Time at the White House regarding our very successful military operation in Iran. This is an historic moment for the United States of America, Israel, and the world, he says. Iran must now agree to end this war. Thank you, says the president. Hal, the word historic. How historic is it? The U.S. just struck within Iran proper.
I think it's pretty historic. I can tell you that the U.S. has been looking at hitting Iran for a very long time. You got to remember, they took our embassy personnel, to include the Marines at the embassy, hostage back in 1979. And, the U.S. was leaning forward. In fact, it's kind of taken as if the Iranians had not released our embassy personnel or the U.S. hostages when they did, when President Reagan took over, literally on his day of inauguration, that the U.S. was ready to actually put military forces possibly in Iran to come up with a solution, military solution to get those hostages released. So let's just say we've been looking at Iran for a very, very, very long time, very, very closely. And so certainly from a military perspective, this is historic because we've actually struck with military firepower Iran. That's something that's very different that we have done. And so I think it is a threshold. It also uh, it'll be interesting to see what happens within Iran politically. Generally speaking, when a country's attacked, uh, there's a rallying around the flag, shall we say, of the body populace that will say, the nationalism will take over. Israel's been working on this really, really hard from a psychological dimension. They've been working on this for years to try and come up with when this ever happens, to deal with the sheer amount of hate and discontent within the Iranian people towards the current regime, and to try and mitigate that normal patriotic fervor, if you will, that happens when they're attacked. To say, hey, look, now's your time to overthrow this regime that you really hate. I'm going to tell you that doesn't always work the way you hope it works. But with this thing taking out the nuclear capability of Iran for the regime, this is a truly devastating blow, which is now they don't have this on the table. And a lot of people are going to be looking at the regime and say, well, what do they have now? What could Iran possibly do other than just sit there and constantly get bombed by the Iranian Air Force unhindered? What can Iran do? And really, what they can do, strategically speaking, is now extremely limited, and that may work into the psychology depending on what else has been going on. And of course, nobody's going to talk about that until we see something happen. That may work into the psychology where the Iranian people may get tired of the regime, and sometimes that happens in wars. They do. I mean, I'll give you a case in point: World War One and Russia. That's how we ended up with the Soviet Union. Was they got tired of that, and the body populace, if you will, overthrew the regime, and that's where the Soviets came from. And so, yeah, these things, sometimes things like that will happen.
Again, President Trump, this is the most recent post he has sent out. I just focused in on the word historic, Hal. I'm going to focus in on another word. Iran must agree to end this war. End, Hal. Does that seem like something Iran would do after something like this?
At this point, I'm sure they're talking about that right now. Now, the only terms of ending the war that I've heard Donald Trump put out is unconditional surrender. That's pretty strong talk. That's what we did with Japan and Germany at the end of World War II. Haven't been a lot of unconditional surrender wars, so he has put that out there. Now, with that said, most think that we'd be willing to back off of an unconditional surrender, and I think the Israelis would be certainly willing to see Iran back off of an unconditional surrender. But really, what has happened kinetically, militarily, is that the core issue that started the war, that got this thing going, that core issue has been maybe not completely removed, but largely removed. Of course, the fear is that Iran will then try to come up with some other way to create weapons of mass destruction. And we certainly have seen that historically in the Middle East. Don't forget, Iraq tried to create a nuclear warhead. All WMD issues with 2003 aside, yes, Iraq had a nuclear facility, and it had a program to try and create a nuclear an atomic bomb, a nuclear warhead, and that was something the Israelis had taken out. Syria tried to do the same thing, yet another thing the Israelis had taken out. And so there has been a history. Oh, and don't forget what Libya was doing in this regard, too. But there has been a history throughout the Middle East of countries trying to create nuclear weapons. And certainly with Iran and their persistence on this issue, most would say they're going to try and do it again. So whatever comes out of this, there's going to have to be some real ironclad guarantees that not only will Iran forgo trying to build a nuclear warhead, but that there's some way to make sure they don't build a nuclear warhead. And so we'll have to see what that turns out to be. I imagine it'll be much more stringent than what you saw within the JCPOA, certainly after everything that's just took place.
Is there what is the likelihood of a war at this point, a U.S. involved war?
Well, there is a war. Right now, the war is primarily between Israel and Iran. The U.S. just stepped into it. I mean, we're now a part of this because we just did a military strike in concert with Israel. All right. So we are technically part of this thing. The question really is, will this war expand as far as the U.S. role? Is this a one and done? And will Iran decide that it's just not worth the price to try and engage the Americans? You know, to basically lick their wounds, if you will, and say, let's not widen this war to engage the Americans more. That's the big question, is what will Iran do? And I'm sure there's a lot of back channel communication on this. I would imagine there's some things that we don't see being done militarily in the area to dissuade Iran from doing something that would be rather foolhardy in trying to engage with the U.S. militarily in a broader way. But you know, the Iranians do some kind of foolhardy, stupid stuff now and again, and well, very frequently, I should say. And so it's not clear what will take place out of this. I wouldn't be surprised to see this happen and then see some other things happen in Iran, which may help shape whatever this turns into in terms of the decision or response that comes out of Iran. I'm pretty sure Israel has a few more, shall we say, tricks up their sleeve that they have not unveiled as of yet. So I'm kind of waiting to see. And if Khamenei, you know, does something, you know, where he decides he wants to declare, you know, a full war on the United States or something like that, I imagine there's some things in store for Khamenei and his regime that he probably hasn't calculated.
We do know that President Trump has said that Khamenei himself would be an easy target, but the U.S.
Hmm.
Has not chosen to kill him. That was what he put on Truth Social not too long ago, Hal. As we look at this map, this kind of lays out some of the facilities of interest, including nuclear facilities. Isfahan is on here, Natanz is on here, Fordow is on here. We've been talking about Fordow extensively, especially for the past few days. Did the Iranians have time, given all the discussion around this site, did the Iranians have the time to perhaps move pertinent hardware out of this facility before strike happened?
That's a darn good question. And I'm sure the Israelis have been asking that, the U.S., we've been asking that as well. I'm also sure that we had probably some intensive intelligence collection to try and verify if that had taken place. And, but, you know, the other side too, certainly once Israel started attacking and their air superiority, which they have kind of referred to as air dominance, which sounds what we would doctrinally call air supremacy, which means they own the air, they own the skies. That if Israel was to try and, or Israel, if Iran was trying to move something, that Israel could probably engage them from the air or potentially engage them with whatever assets they had on the ground to try and stop that from happening. And I would be surprised if Israel hadn't built that into their planning process, the what if, you know, what if they try to move this here? What if they do that? That they had those plans already in place, that if they tried to move certain components to another location, that that movement, that convoy, or whatever it is that they were trying to move those components would come under attack. So far as I can tell, that has not happened. One thing I would mention with Fordow, and this is something Iranians have to figure out, is okay, what's the danger if we try to move it? And I would say if they try to move that stuff out of there, it would have been extremely high. Once they brought that stuff to the surface, I would be surprised if it wouldn't be immediately engaged once Israel had identified that as whatever it was tied to the nuclear program, that they would hit it. Um, so that probably in their minds are thinking, well, why don't we just keep it where it is in Fordow, in those deep underground bunkers, those cavities, those facilities, and we'll just ride this out and hope that the U.S. can't take this out with their, you know, MOP bombs from B-2s. Well, that's now done. That's a fait accompli. It's been complete, so they're done. And so now uh, it may very well be that the U.S. has eliminated the Iranian capability to create a nuclear device. It may be. I'm sure there's going to be more that comes out on that. And if we have not, if they have moved stuff and we know about it, or the Israelis know about it, and they're working with us, telling us where this stuff is, it's not impossible that you might find some follow-up action to address that continuing threat.